Okay, and now prepare yourself for a fascinating conversation with Lanny Davis. He is a veteran Washington insider, a lawyer, a Democrat advisor. Lanny and I have known each other closer to 20 years back from my Forbes days. And I've always found him to be just such a delightful guy and just a kind man, even though as a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, he's wrong on many issues. Thanks for being with us, Lanny. We're talking Twitter files today. And instead of starting with conflict the way I did my entire career as a journalist, let's look for some agreement and figure out if we can come up with three big overarching points we agree on what the Twitter files show or what they mean. So start me off.
Well, first of all, the marketplace of ideas and James Madison's definition of why he wrote the First Amendment into our Constitution as the first 10 amendments after the Constitution had been adopted. I'm a believer, and therefore offensive speech has to be protected, especially speech that offends me has to be protected. So we've spent a long time defining the limits of First Amendment expression. We can get into that, but I start out with that Twitter is a marketplace and all opinions should be welcomed. And secondly, I disagreed with the banning of Donald Trump or anybody who is engaging in offensive speech, offensive to me politically. I certainly believe he is entitled to have Twitter as a platform. But I will get into this, just as I said, the first point, that First Amendment has some limits that are under the law and necessary. We should have some limits on Donald Trump's ability to speak if they're inaccurate. There should be a labeling process that Twitter will have its difficulty with and will be controversial, but I would not ban him. I would certainly identify a proven falsehood on his Twitter account, or at least raise a question.
Okay.
Please check the facts. And then the third thing that I really do agree with you on, I respect Barry Weiss a great deal, followed her career. I don't know the other gentleman, but I don't agree if anybody at Twitter engaged in political censorship because they didn't like Trump or they were like Democrats or Joe Biden. That's not the role of Twitter. There is a role of somebody to monitor speech, and we'll talk about how that should be done in an ideologically bipartisan or nonpartisan way. So I think those are the three things we might agree on.
Those are three pretty good starting points. Okay, so Lanny was just saying, just to make sure I got this. So is it all right? Well, and now let me further say, would you agree that this is a pretty big news story here, that this is a pretty shocking development? I mean, I know you've seen a lot in Washington. Does this strike you as run of the mill, or does it strike you as, oh, whoa, this is bigger than that?
So I love saying about myself, and my children, of course, say, Dad, you're full of you know what. But I still love to say that I don't like adjectives. I don't like adverbs. When I do television or anything, I try to just stick to facts that I know are true. And if I don't know them to be true, I say, let's find out. So I don't want to characterize this story until I know more about the facts. I sent you one article that raised some questions about the selectivity of the presentation, but I don't impute bad motives to these two people who tracked down these emails at Twitter. I simply say, I don't know whether we've seen the full picture. It certainly is an interesting story. If there was a corporate plan to censor ideologically either Donald Trump or Joe Biden or people in between, that to me is an interesting story. I'm not so sure if it's just Twitter, how big it is, because it is just
interesting. It's more than interesting. Sure. I mean, it would outrage you, right? It would outrage you if someone did that to you from one of these platforms and just silenced you without your even knowing it, without telling you that you were doing something wrong.
For sure. And the only colloquy we had in our emails is, I'm not sure whether this was poor judgment by one or a few individuals at Twitter or whether it was a company-wide policy. I would make a distinction between those two. But yes, even if it was just one person, it would upset me if it was done to Donald Trump or to Joe Biden.
Sure. One of the things I've been thinking all along, Lanny, is that, well, as long as a private platform did this, it might be their right to do it. Although at some point, if you get a critical mass of millions of people, I don't even know if that should be your right. It's also not good business, because why not have double the market? But the other thing is, we now know from the Twitter files, and you can see it on the calendars of Yale Roth, the chief censor, and other documents. You can see that the FBI was in touch with them every single week. The Department of Homeland Security, the Director of National Intelligence were in touch with Twitter weekly, warning them of Russian disinformation could be coming, kind of prepping them for, bashing the laptop. So once government starts in there and starts to, quote, ask or suggest, my thought, Lanny, is that no government request is a request, and that amounts to the FBI's requesting an unconstitutional prior restraint on content.
What do they say in the trite expression on cable television? How do I unpack your statement that has a question mark after your statement? It's got lots of assumed facts in there that I would rather
6 years.
say.
6 years, baby.
I accept your characterization as sincere. I don't adopt the words that you use, but if you want to ask me an open-ended question, I'll give you my opinion.
Does it bother you that the FBI was in touch directly with Twitter executives every single week in the weeks leading up to the election?
Let's stop with that, and then you'll do the other multiple ones that you mentioned. Absolutely not, because we know as a proven fact that Twitter was used by the Russia agency. We actually know the address and the people, and Mr. Mueller indicted them, never will be able to arrest them. We do know that the Russians used Twitter, used bots to spread misinformation about the campaign, which is a foreign government interfering in our elections. That's a subject for both our intelligence agencies and our FBI to warn Twitter that it's being used by bots or which are non-people or real people living in St. Petersburg, Russia. That's an appropriate communication. Now I'd like to see, what did they say to Twitter that might be inappropriate? And what did they do, which also might be inappropriate? That's what I don't know.
I see your point about that. At the same time, I was on Newsmax with Michael Grimm, a former congressman and a former FBI agent, who said that he felt like it was entirely inappropriate and out of protocol for the FBI to be in touch that much. And where was this Russian disinformation coming from? In fact, it leads to another question I may ask you. I think that even if it were Russian disinformation that led to the release of the Hunter Biden laptop, and the laptop contents, whatever they show or say, were authentic and true, I think that I don't care that it's Russian disinformation. I care that a newspaper was stopped from circulating the report. Do you disagree or agree with that?
Again, I don't. You had so many things in your question that may not be true. Let's do one at a time and start with, you're a great compound questioner. In the practice of law, we love having lawyers like you ask us questions, because we can always say something that doesn't answer your question because you have compound parts to it. But anyway, I'm being a lawyer. Let's start with your FBI agent's comment. I don't know how anybody, I'm sure he's a respected and should be a respected former FBI agent, but most FBI agents wouldn't offer an opinion without facts. And I'm not sure how much he knows.
Brennan, Clapper, I mean, give me a break now. That seems a little bit of a precious objection. Come on, man. Just, do you think that...
No, it would be wrong if they did.
If it were Russian disinformation, should the post have been censored by Twitter?
So again, you're using a verb, censored. So let's unpack that word. So the FBI agent said it's inappropriate for an FBI agent to contact Twitter. And we don't know what was said and what the request was. But I think it's entirely appropriate as part of a criminal investigation that was ongoing about Russian interference in the U.S. election, a felony, for them to notify, and that would be my verb. I don't know what was said. Be careful, you may be being used to implement a crime by a bunch of Russian agents located in St. Petersburg. So that's okay with me. Beyond that, I don't know what the FBI agent is reporting from. So
I'm making the mistake that I've been complaining about in others, that I try to talk to them and we go down into the tangle of details instead of being up here. And up here, we realize
up here is where no facts are. You don't want
look, here's the thing. A 220-year-old newspaper, the New York Post, never should have had its account suspended for a story that it looked into. It's up to the Post to get that story right. It's not up to Twitter employees to decide whether the Post has that story right. And they did doing that. And they've said that. But then we've got, even in the Wall Street Journal op-ed today, Gerard Baker, the former editor of the Wall Street Journal, saying, this is not surprising. Lanny, I think that these kind of transgression should be surprising. I think it's bad when we start to, we're going to end up seeing what they did on COVID. Remember, they took Jay Bhattacharya, who had more than 200,000 followers. He's a Harvard doctor. He wrote a paper saying, I think this COVID lockdown thing could hurt kids, closing schools. They silenced him without even telling him. I mean, I think it's, and so isn't that bad? That's not dangerous speech, right? You don't, that's not dangerous speech to have a paper about COVID.
Your producer is going to have to help you asking one question at a time of your guests so that we can parse them out. Let's do number one is the New York Post, and we'll talk about the doctor on COVID, because I do may surprise you by agreeing with you about the COVID doctor. So the New York Post should not have been censored by anyone at Twitter, even if it's a story about President Biden's son, Hunter, that was untrue. The marketplace of ideas, which Twitter should be, and which James Madison predicted, we're going to read a lot of things that are false, a lot of things that are nasty, a lot of things that we disagree with, by having a protected First Amendment for free speech. So certainly that is, I can't justify that as a liberal Democrat believing in the First Amendment. However, the facts about what happened on the Post story, as I read in the article that I sent to you, and I invited you to tell me what's inaccurate in the article. I don't know if the article is true. I'm looking for someone to tell me that the reporter in that New York Magazine Intelligencer article that I would recommend to all your listeners. So one thing I did not know until I read the article is that there were a chain of emails where there were some people disagreeing with the decision not to publish that story. There were other people who thought it should be published. And there was a debate back and forth in the emails. And that debate delayed the publication of the story by one day. So if everybody on your side that thinks this was a terrible thing, which I respect that opinion, would add, but it only was a one-day delay. So everything is under the caveat that the suppression and the bias and everything else that's perceived about what was done by somebody at Twitter in the middle of this debate only delayed the publication of the Post article by one day, if that's true.
Okay.
And the reporter said it was true. I haven't read that before in all of the flurry of excitement about Barry Weiss's work, and I forget the name of the gentleman.
Okay. So got to respond to some of that. First of all,
please.
It was more than one day, because they made sure to silence other accounts and quell them down and not let them pass it around. They continue to do that. It's not like you decide finally we're going to let it do it. Okay. And then second, I read the New York Magazine article thoroughly. And if I were an editor on the conservative side, I could have cut it to pieces, because it has plenty of overreaches and plenty of snide remarks. But I think the good thing, Lanny, is we do agree on one thing, okay? And this is the opening to the magazine story. Twitter is not what it seems. The social media platform poses as a neutral marketplace for the exchange of ideas and information, but actually it's a tool of progressive power. Now, he's just setting up the straw man where he then says, that's bull and blah, blah, blah. But I did agree for that.
It was an interesting opening. I didn't know where he's coming from. But let's at least isolate what just happened between us before we get to the doctor and COVID. I did not hear you say it was inaccurate to say that after one day, the Post story was published.
No, that's inaccurate. Okay, that's inaccurate.
Inaccurate.
No, no, that is inaccurate, because the ripple effect of that and all this stuff.
No, the ripple effect doesn't mean
filters. No, the consequences. Filter. Yes.
So what's inaccurate? Did they publish it within one day? Yes or no? I don't know the answer. I think
they suspended the Post account. They suspended the presidential spokesman's account for.
I'm just trying to do this.
It's Matt McEnany. I mean, they suspended the White House kind of blocked her account.
Why are you changing the subject of all people who I know? Saying that great editor.
More than just
the subject was the Post story published on Twitter one day later.
That doesn't make the point that they're trying to make with that.
I understand it.
Furthermore, by the way, if you really want to get into details,
you don't want to answer my question. This is very suspicious.
Okay,
Dennis always answers.
No, it's okay. I don't know. Okay, and now talk to us about the censoring of the account of Dr. Bhattacharya.
So I'm not adopting your word censoring, but I think it's a very serious question I want to know more about. And I don't know the facts. If the doctor had an opinion, science-based, that he wished to express about the over restrictions on COVID, especially the effects on children, and he disagreed with that policy that led to the closing down of schools and the overdoing of the restrictions. That's my understanding of the way you characterized it, or the way I've read. And if that happened, I would strongly disagree with that. I think he was entitled to be heard both on Twitter and on television and this podcast.
Lanny Davis, I think that's a great place to leave it, because now we agreed, and now it looks as if I was right about something. Hey, man, I appreciate your time. I enjoy your thoughts, and I hope you'll come back. Okay.
I hope Brian will let us have this exchange again. We'll do better next time, Brian.
Brian, Mr. Producer. Yeah. Thanks so much, Lanny, and have a glorious weekend, my friend. Okay.